leadership, actually, and we're already on our last question. This has been great, Lee. Thank you.
Thank you.
Um, One of the major pain points, and I thought that this was one of the most fascinating parts of the research, but one of the major pain points that came through was the sense of the CIO being sort of pulled in multiple directions in the org, a little stretched thin, and juggling this strategist role with a practitioner role. They had said that addressing security threats was their number one distraction, probably on a daily basis, pulling them away from strategic or innovative tasks. And this is where I'm really kind of excited to bring some of this data to life, because as a data point, it's interesting, but I mean, that has got to be frustrating, right? Like, does this resonate with CIOs across the board? And for CIOs with maybe more strategic aspirations, are they stuck in the operational weeds when they're really looking for sort of a full-time seat at that executive and board table?
I think we could do a whole other session on leadership. I mean, I ask a specific leadership question in all of my interviews. And then I actually have a series, a smaller, shorter series called 3 Seriously Outstanding Leadership Tips from the Person. So, we dig into this. So I think what you're finding from leaders now, there's a greater awareness of what it means to be a leader, right? I think companies in general worldwide are looking at, if you're going to be in a leadership role, do you have the tools to do that? What type of training can you get? How can you get upskilled in this area? There's seems to be a greater emphasis on HR in general for the leader. However, with this workload that we just talked about, the leader is, as you mentioned, stretched in many, many different directions. And the report obviously acknowledges that. We haven't talked too much about cybersecurity, but what you're seeing is, or what I've seen over the last year, is greater collaboration between the CISO and the CIO, or in some cases, the CIO taking the security remit. Now, we have a little bit of an issue with security in that it's still hard to find, effective teams doing your security operations. So you've got a bit of a gap there. One CIO I spoke with said he was hiring a security manager, and it took 168 days to get one.
Oh, wow.
So when you talk about the research coming out that they're kind of stuck in the weeds, that's where you find it, right? Resourcing, upskilling these teams. Again, going back to that idea of the vendor collaboration, I think that's really key in it. I get really inspired by talking to these amazing leaders. And I was really honored last year. In fact, I'm getting goosebumps, but it was so amazing. I reached out to the CIO of NATO, Manfred Boudreau-Dema, about his role and, what he does there. And when we had our first chat, he said, I came out of the corporate world and I would go into these difficult board meetings and I'd come out and I'd think, oh my gosh, I've got to manage this, there's this expectation. In his role at NATO, he has 31 other CIOs from 31, soon to be 32. I don't think Sweden's in yet, or they might be. So it could be 32. Apologies, Manfred, for that. But 32 partner countries, coming to the table to talk about technology and security and all of those things. And how they do that is they do it all by consensus. So if one country says no, it doesn't fly. So can you imagine being in that position as a leader? Now, one thing he really, really mentioned was the fact that, he paints the vision of the North Star. And when it's painted in the sky and the North Star is there and the strategy of the organization, then he really looks to ensure he follows it. And I found that very inspirational. So maybe we can take a quick listen to that clip. So we did have a chance to chat earlier about leadership and technology, and you've transitioned into your current role at NATO from working in the telco and tech industries. And really, as you mentioned, this is your inaugural role as a CIO at NATO. So congratulations for that. That must just hold a lot of responsibility. So I speak with a lot of CIOs about getting a seat at the boardroom table. And you and I talked about that, about, being in that boardroom meeting, how to navigate all of that from a leadership standpoint. Well, in your case, you hold a seat with 31 nations, almost 32 around the world, who make decisions by consensus. And we talked about that. And, you're leading from a global positioning of technology. So, could you talk a little bit about some of the ways your leadership skills have evolved? Any tips you could provide for those who really want to have a seat at the boardroom table?
Yes, I think there are probably a couple of questions in that question. One is
Sure.
how have leadership just kind of like what's the philosophy on leadership? And it's interesting. I mean, when I started out as a leader and also as a manager, which is not the same as leadership, but they're somewhat related. And this was, I think it was in 1996, and I had kind of like a small team of 5 people. I just thought, okay, those are going to be like 5 mini-me's, so like five copies, and then whatever I do, and it's going to be the same output times 5, and this is all going to be just great. And it does not work like that. So it's not carbon copies of a person who then kind of do the same thing. So that was the first realization that came. And at that time, I also worked in an environment that was fairly kind of hierarchical and a bit of command and control and all of these things. And I kind of thought that, well, you would get something, kind of a task on your desk, and then you have to translate that, and then you give out the task to other people. And it was later, kind of when I did other things at Compaq and at HP, that I realized that it's really quite different. So I think as a leader, it starts with you need to be a painter. I think you need to collectively come up with your team and define a vision that is in line with the business vision, but it is for IT. There is kind of no such thing as just an IT vision. It needs to be fully supported and part and parcel with the business vision. And then you need to paint that on the sky, and that is the North Star. And I think you need to refer to the North Star at all times, right? And always be able to calibrate the entire organization, almost like magnets, towards that one North Star that's painted at the sky, regardless of what happens, right? There needs to be this guiding principle and this guiding star. I think you need to be an architect at the same time, and that is to really define a self-sufficient organization that relies on its own judgment at various levels, where you set the vision and then you kind of help execute it, but you largely let the organization in itself loose to achieve that vision. I think you need to be a catalyst. So whenever there are stumbling stones in that path, roadblocks, things that you can remove, connections that you need to forge with other departments or with other entities, that is also an important part of the leader. I think you need to support an encouraging, open, psychologically safe, very supportive environment where everybody is enabled at a very basic level to give their very best.
That's a great interview, Lee. I've watched that episode. I think he goes on later in that episode to give this great cart and horse analogy as well about leadership, where he talks about the seat at the board table is the cart and making yourself heard as the horse, and don't put the cart in front of the horse. Just this idea that if you bring passion and a mind for strategy, because everybody sort of seems that they aspire to that seat at the board table, right? But if you bring passion and a mind for strategy, that seat will follow. So I'm sure that there's that balancing act for CIOs and IT leaders to be maybe inserting themselves or into the strategy a little bit more and then following through. I love how he sort of talks about a managing up principle and then setting expectations internally up and down. But that's just perfect the way that he describes it, the painter and the architect, sort of a visionary and a builder at the same time. So it sounds like that will always be part of the role of the CIO, a little hands-on, a little strategic, a little painterly.
Yeah, and I think if you look at that interview we previously, part of the interview with Raji, she sort of almost talks about that as well too, saying, if you don't paint in the sky, if you don't do that creation, you're not gonna succeed, right? When we were talking about AI, so I think that's really interesting. I just recently interviewed John Pinard, who's a CIO and CISO at Duca Financial Credit Union here in Canada. And he really did talk a lot about that, the North Star, building the strategy and how important it is right now. And he mentioned something really interesting. He says, It's about collaboration with the C-suite and the board, and it's not IT for IT's sake, it's IT for business sake. So maybe we can take a listen to his clip. We just released the State of the CIO 2024 report. And when they polled CIOs, 79% said they have a closer relationship with the CEO and the board of directors. It's a learning, educational kind of partnership. So can you talk a little bit about your learning in both sectors? And first of all, do you see those skill buildings in the different sectors transferable? And then it sounds like you've had more alignment with your CEOs and your leaders. Maybe you could comment on that too, just the evolving role of the tech leader.
Yeah, no problem. I mean, I can tell you that, as I said, that my career path has changed dramatically, but so have the interactions. Back in my early days, IT were those guys that you threw in the basement and you kind of locked them behind closed doors. I spend probably as much time with our senior leadership team talking about business and the development of our business as I do talking with my technical team on what we have to do from a technical side. So it really has changed that, it's IT for business sake, not IT for IT sake.
Right. That's really interesting. And that's what we're hearing as well too. And I think, it's just going to continue to evolve in that way. And as you said, if you're getting into your career, be prepared to do that leadership aspect as well too, right? Like, it's not like you said, like the IT crowd in the basement, have you turned it on and off again? It doesn't work that way anymore. So
Exactly.
It hasn't worked that way for a long time, actually, but I love referencing that show and just having fun with that. So, I mean, Rachael, I think, what John is saying is really interesting. And I think, you've obviously found this from the research that you've put out, is that, that CIO is really now taking on a very serious leadership role, really inserting themselves from the standpoint of creation, business building, and, leading organizations.